There's a particular kind of loneliness that happens in a crowd of screaming people. Picture yourself sitting there, maybe at a bar or in someone's living room, or at the stadium itself, and everyone around you is erupting with an energy that seems to come from somewhere deep and primal. Strangers are on their feet, voices cracking, hugging people they've never met before, and grown adults have tears streaming down their faces because a ball crossed a line, or a player made a shot, or a referee made a call that somehow changed everything in their world. And when you look inside yourself for that same feeling, you find nothing, just a vast and echoless quiet where everyone else seems to feel thunder. You watch their faces contort with hope and rage and devastation and euphoria, and you search for even a flicker of what they're experiencing. Sometimes wanting to care because it looks so alive and so connected and so full of something you can't quite name. When you reach for it though, there's just silence, a polite and bewildered emptiness like standing outside a house where a party is happening and pressing your ear to the glass, hearing the muffled sounds but feeling none of the warmth. So you smile and nod and make the right sounds at the right moments, learning the choreography of enthusiasm, even when you can't hear the music that everyone else moves to. Maybe no one notices your performance, or maybe they do and look at you with confusion, or even concern. As if you've revealed something fundamentally broken in yourself that you didn't know was supposed to work. How can you not care? They ask with genuine bewilderment written across their faces. The truth is you don't know, and you didn't choose this emptiness or arrive at it through some intellectual position or rebellious stance against mainstream culture. What's there when you look inside is simply what's there, or rather, what's not there. And no amount of trying seems to change that basic fact. This script isn't about convincing you to care about sports or explaining why you should feel something you don't. And it's not about fixing what other people think is broken. What we're doing here is understanding why you don't care and what that quiet indifference reveals about the architecture of your inner world, about how your particular nervous system constructs meaning and connection and aliveness. Here's what most people don't understand about your experience. Your lack of feeling isn't an absence at all, it's a presence. It's information. It's a window into how your brain decides what matters and what doesn't. When you truly understand this mechanism, it stops feeling like a deficit and starts feeling like a language you've been speaking all along without realizing anyone else was listening. The people around you who are lost in the game aren't experiencing something objectively meaningful that you're somehow missing through some fault of your own. What they're experiencing is their own psychological wiring, their own history, their own need for belonging and release, a narrative playing out in real time. And you're experiencing yours, which just happens to look different. The silence you feel isn't numbness or emotional flatness, or the inability to feel joy. It's discernment. It's your brain looking elsewhere for what it needs. Understanding where it's looking and why can tell you more about who you are than almost anything else you could examine about yourself. So we're going to sit with this silence together and explore it. Not to fix it or make you care about sports, but to help you understand the deeper psychology of what it means to be unmoved by something that moves so many others so profoundly. In that understanding, there's a kind of homecoming, a recognition, a relief that washes over you when you realize you're not broken and you're not missing something essential to the human experience. You're just wired for a different kind of aliveness, and once you see that clearly, the loneliness in the crowded room starts to dissolve. Not because you suddenly care about the game, but because you finally understand why you never did. And that understanding changes everything about how you see yourself. Your brain is always listening for what matters, scanning the environment every moment beneath your conscious awareness for signals of importance like threats and opportunities, and connection, and meaning. When it detects something significant, a cascade of neurochemicals floods your system and makes you feel the significance in your body, not just know it intellectually. Dopamine arrives for anticipation and reward, oxytocin for bonding, adrenaline for urgency. And these chemicals don't just tell you something matters, they make it matter by wiring the experience into your body as sensation and aliveness and truth. When people watch sports, their brains light up like cities at night with activity spreading across multiple regions simultaneously. The uncertainty of the outcome triggers dopamine pathways, the same ones activated by gambling and falling in love, and any situation where the stakes feel real but the result is unknown and your brain craves that delicious tension. Mirror neurons fire in response to the collective energy of the crowd, those peculiar cells that make you feel what others around you are feeling and create a kind of emotional contagion that spreads like wildfire through a stadium. Tribal identity kicks in when you wear the colours and chant the songs and belong to we instead of I, releasing oxytocin that makes you feel part of something larger than your individual self. For those people, sports aren't just entertainment or a way to pass time on a Sunday afternoon. They're a reliable delivery system for feelings that the brain craves like hunger craves food, tension and release, belonging and triumph, shared narrative and emotional catharsis. But your brain, your particular and specific brain, doesn't respond to those triggers the way theirs do. You can feel all of those things absolutely, but your reward system and your mirror neurons and your tribal circuitry are calibrated differently, listening for different signals and waiting for different cues that sports just don't provide. Think about the last time you felt truly absorbed in something. When hours passed like minutes and you forgot to eat or check your phone or wonder what you looked like. Maybe it was reading something that rearranged your understanding of a topic you thought you knew, or a conversation that went deep into the early hours when you were supposed to be sleeping. Or creating something, or solving something, or discovering something that clicked into place with an almost physical satisfaction. Maybe it was music that seemed to speak directly to something wordless inside you, or nature that made you feel both small and significant at the same time, or solitude itself with no one watching and no one needing anything from you. Your brain flooded with the same neurochemicals that sports fans experience during a championship game, but in response to entirely different stimuli that most people would find boring or irrelevant. This isn't a value judgment about whose brain is better or whose experiences are more valid. It's neurological variance, and it often traces back to how your brain developed its reward pathways in the first place during those critical early years. The brain builds its sense of what's important through early repeated exposure to certain experiences paired with emotional resonance. When your childhood environment didn't emphasize sports or frame athletic competition as a source of connection or pride or family bonding or personal identity, your neural pathways simply didn't wire sports into your reward circuitry the way other children's brains did. The infrastructure for caring was never built, like constructing a house without plumbing and then wondering years later why water doesn't flow from the taps. And here's what's crucial to understand about this developmental process. You can't force your brain to assign significance to something. It doesn't register as significant, no matter how hard you try or how much you intellectually understand why others care. Understanding isn't feeling, knowledge isn't activation, and pretending to care doesn't rewire the pathways that determine what genuinely moves you. There's also something deeper happening here, something about how your particular nervous system relates to intensity itself and what kinds of emotional states feel safe versus overwhelming. Sports fandom often relies on a capacity for intense and almost aggressive emotional investment in abstract outcomes, the ability to feel genuine devastation over a loss or genuine euphoria over a win, even though these events don't actually change your material reality in any measurable way. This requires a certain kind of emotional surrender, a willingness to let your nervous system be hijacked by vicarious experience and to ride the waves of emotional volatility without needing to control or understand or make meaning from them. Some brains do this easily and naturally, finding it almost effortless to be porous to collective energy and responsive to tribal belonging and comfortable with emotional volatility. They find aliveness in merging with the crowd, in losing themselves in shared intensity, in the permission to feel things loudly and publicly without self-consciousness. Other brains, perhaps yours, are more boundaried and selective about what they allow to penetrate their emotional core. They need to feel personally connected to something before they can invest emotional energy in it, experiencing aliveness through depth rather than intensity, through meaning rather than stimulation, through authentic resonance rather than borrowed enthusiasm from people around them. Neither operating system is better or worse, They're just different ways of being alive in the world. And when you understand this fundamental difference, when you see that your indifference isn't a failure of spirit, but a difference in wiring, it stops feeling like something's wrong with you. You're not emotionally stunted or cynical or cold or unable to experience joy. You're not broken or missing some essential human capacity. You're just a brain that built its reward pathways around different experiences and different forms of connection and different sources of meaning. A brain that needs to understand why something matters before it can feel that it matters. A brain that doesn't surrender to collective energy, but seeks its own authentic resonance in quieter and more personal places. And that brain, your brain, is simply looking elsewhere for what it needs. There's a question underneath your indifference that has nothing to do with sports, and everything to do with what kind of experiences make you feel real. When we talk about caring, what we're really discussing is what activates some essential part of your identity, your values, your sense of what it means to be alive and human and connected to something beyond yourself. For many people, sports provide exactly that container for very real psychological needs that would otherwise go unmet. The narrative arc of a season mirrors the human need for story, with its rising action and climax and resolution. The physical excellence on display mirrors the human appreciation for mastery and the perfection of skill. The tribal belonging mirrors the human hunger for community and the comfort of knowing where you fit. High-stakes uncertainty mirrors the human need for tension and release, for the emotional roller coaster that makes you feel intensely alive even when nothing in your actual life is changing. But you meet those same psychological needs differently, finding narrative in books or films or the slow unfolding of your own life with its private plot twists that no one else witnesses. Mastery appears in your work or your creativity or the private refinement of skills that no one else sees or applauds. And community shows up in intimate conversations or shared silence with people who understand you, or the quiet recognition that happens between kindred spirits who don't need to explain themselves. Tension and release come from your own internal processes, from working through ideas or the satisfaction of understanding something complex, or the relief of finally putting words to a feeling you've carried wordlessly for years. There's often a pattern in people who feel nothing about sports, a clustering of personality traits that starts to make sense when you look at enough cases. They tend to score higher in openness to experience and lower in extroversion, more drawn to complexity and nuance than to clear wins and losses, more analytical and introspective in how they process the world around them. What's particularly interesting is their relationship with competition itself, which isn't that they can't compete or don't have ambition, but that their definition of achievement is internal rather than comparative. They don't need to beat anyone to feel successful. They need to become someone, to grow into a version of themselves that feels more authentic and capable and aligned with their values. Sports at their core are about victory and defeat, about being better than the opponent, about the clarity of scoreboard and standings, and who's on top and who's not. This binary simplicity of win or lose, good or bad, us or them, just doesn't resonate with brains that live in the nuance, that find meaning in the grey areas, that measure value by depth rather than dominance or superiority. You might also notice something about the social performance of sports enthusiasm and how it functions as currency in certain contexts. Caring about sports is an easy way to connect with strangers, to bond with colleagues, to signal that you're part of the group without revealing anything vulnerable or personal about yourself. It's a safe topic that requires no real intimacy, a shared reference point that fills silence and creates the appearance of connection without requiring you to be seen or known in any meaningful way. And maybe you've never been good at that kind of connection, the surface-level camaraderie and the loud, energetic belonging that doesn't require you to be known, only to participate and perform the right reactions at the right moments. Maybe you've always needed something different from your relationships, something quieter and more substantial, something where you can be yourself rather than performing a version of yourself that fits the situation. Connection for you happens through mutual understanding rather than mutual enthusiasm, through the recognition of shared inner worlds rather than shared outer allegiances. This need for authentic connection can make you feel isolated, especially in cultures where sports fandom is woven into the social fabric, like threads you can't separate, without unraveling the whole thing. You learn to fake it with the right comments at the right times, or you learn to stay silent and hope no one notices. Or you learn to leave early before the game watching turns into the main event. What develops over time is a kind of psychological camouflage, a way of being present in your body without being engaged with what's happening around you. And that performance, that constant awareness that you're supposed to care but don't, and that everyone can probably tell you're faking it, creates its own quiet exhaustion that accumulates over years. Here's what's actually happening beneath the surface of this dynamic. You're not just unmoved by sports, you're protecting your emotional energy for what genuinely matters to you, and your brain has a limited capacity for investment that it's choosing, consciously or not, to reserve for experiences that feel authentic to who you are. This is psychologically healthy. This is your integrity speaking. This is your inner self refusing to spend its resources on performances that drain rather than fill you. But it doesn't always feel healthy when everyone around you seems to effortlessly plug into something that leaves you cold, when the ease with which they bond and connect and find joy makes your isolation feel like evidence of some fundamental human capacity you're missing. You start to wonder if you're broken, if something essential got left out when you were being assembled, if you're just not capable of the kind of joy and abandon and connection that seems to come so naturally to everyone else. You're not missing anything. You're just wired for a different kind of joy, a different quality of connection, a different form of abandon that doesn't look like what plays out in stadiums. The tragedy isn't that you don't care about sports. The tragedy is that you've maybe spent years wondering what's wrong with you, instead of asking what's right with you. What essential part of your nature is being revealed by this very specific indifference? Your lack of interest in sports is actually a compass pointing you toward what you do care about, toward the experiences that make you feel truly alive, toward the forms of meaning that resonate with your particular psychology. When you stop trying to care about what you're supposed to care about and start honouring what actually moves you, that's when your life begins to feel like yours, instead of a performance you're giving for an audience that isn't even paying attention. So what do you do with this understanding now that you have it? You stop apologising for the silence, not in a defensive way, or with explanations or justifications that try to make other people understand, but with a quiet recognition that your indifference is simply true about you. It's not a failure or something to fix or a deficit that needs correcting. It's just the particular shape of your attention, the specific contours of your aliveness that happen to be different from what the majority experiences. When someone asks if you saw the game, you can say, "No, I don't really follow it," with the same neutrality you'd say, "I don't drink coffee," or "I'm not into podcasts," or "I don't watch that show everyone's talking about." It doesn't need to be a statement about values or a position you're taking against popular culture. It's just a fact about how you're wired that requires no more explanation than any other preference. And if they press, if they can't quite believe you don't care, or they think you're just being difficult or contrarian, you can offer them a window into your experience. "I think I just don't feel connected to it the way other people do, and my brain lights up for different things that might seem equally strange to you." Most people will accept this simple truth and move on to other topics, but some won't be able to let it go, usually the ones who've built their identity so thoroughly around sports that your indifference feels like a rejection of them personally. That's not your burden to carry or your problem to solve, and you can let them have their feelings without taking responsibility for managing them. Here's the deeper truth that often gets overlooked in conversations about sports indifference. You've been given something rare by having a brain that doesn't automatically assign value to what everyone else values, while others pour their emotional energy into outcomes they can't control, into the victories and defeats of strangers wearing jerseys who don't know they exist. You've been freed to invest that same energy into things that genuinely shape your life in tangible ways. Your work gets your attention, your relationships get your emotional investment, your growth and creativity, and understanding get the passion that others spend screaming at televisions. This isn't about superiority or looking down on people who love sports. It's about specificity. about recognizing that your psychology has made you available for a particular kind of depth that requires the very sensitivity that leaves you unmoved by collective enthusiasm. You notice things others miss because you're not swept up in the crowd. You think about things others don't because your attention isn't divided between your life and someone else's game. You feel things, different things, in the quiet spaces where others need noise and crowds and collective intensity to feel alive. And the world needs this desperately, more than it knows or acknowledges. It needs people who aren't swept up in every wave of collective enthusiasm, who can stand apart and think clearly when everyone else is losing their minds over things that don't actually matter. It needs people who find meaning in subtlety rather than spectacle, who build their identity from the inside out rather than borrowing it from tribal belonging, who can sit with silence and complexity and ambiguity without needing the clarity of a scoreboard. Your task now is to find your stadium moments, the experiences that make you feel what sports fans feel when their team wins, not to replace sports because you don't need a replacement, but to honour what actually moves you. Maybe it's finishing a project that took everything you had and left you empty but satisfied, or a conversation that left you different than you were before it started, or the moment a complex idea finally makes sense after weeks or months of circling around it. Maybe it's a piece of music that rewires something in your chest, or creating something that didn't exist before you made it exist. Or solitude itself with its deep and rare aliveness of being completely alone with your thoughts. Whatever it is, you're allowed to build your life around it without apology. You're allowed to let it matter more than what everyone else says should matter. You're allowed to feel the full depth of your enthusiasm for things that would bore other people to tears. That's where your aliveness lives. Not in the roar of the stadium, but in the quiet recognition of what genuinely touches you. When you stop performing interest in what doesn't move you, you create space for what does, and you become more yourself in the process. More available for the experiences that make you feel real, more honest in your connections with people who actually see you, more aligned with your actual values instead of the values you think you're supposed to have. The loneliness in the crowded room doesn't disappear entirely, but it transforms into something different. It becomes less about what you're missing and more about what you've found, a kind of sovereignty over your own attention and your own emotional life and your own sense of what matters in the brief time you have on this planet. You learn to be comfortable in the silence while others scream around you, not because you're above their experience or removed from the human need for connection and meaning and aliveness, but because you've discovered that your connection and your meaning and your aliveness speak a different language. And that language, your language, is worth learning to speak fluently, even if no one else understands it. So the next time you find yourself in that crowded room, unmoved while everyone around you erupts with joy or despair over something you don't feel, you can sit in the silence without shame or self-doubt, without wondering what's wrong with you or trying to manufacture enthusiasm you don't feel, without performing or pretending or wishing you were different. You can simply be there, present to your own experience, knowing that your indifference is data about who you are and what you need and where your particular form of aliveness wants to go. And that's not a loss or a deficit or something to apologise for, that's a gift. The gift of knowing yourself clearly enough to stop performing, to stop pretending, to stop wondering if you're broken when you were never broken in the first place. You're just listening to a frequency others can't hear. And finally, after all this time, learning to trust that what you hear is real.